Hi, so we're going to look at research methods. We're doing research methods once a week again, and we're going to start with reliability. So we've already discussed reliability throughout all of our lessons. So we've said whether something has high reliability or low reliability. But what we're going to look at in particular now is what it means for something to be reliable and how we can test the reliability of different methods. And then once we've tested the reliability of different methods, if it's not reliable, how could we make that method a little bit more reliable? So what I want you to do to start off with is write me a definition of the word reliability. Don't look back at your notes, try and do it off the top of your head, and I'll give you a definition in a minute's time. What I'd also like you to do is look at the methods that we have on the side of the screen. So we've got lab, field, natural, quasi, interviews, questionnaires, etc. For each of these methods, I want you to think about, are they high reliability or do they have low reliability? What you can do is you can put them on a scale from highest to lowest, or you could divide your page into high reliability, low reliability, and then just list them. If you're unsure of any of the methods or what they mean, then it might be worth going back through your notes and just jotting these down as a bit of a glossary if you can't remember them. So like longitudinal studies, that might be something that we haven't really looked at in a lot of detail, or a meta-analysis, you might not remember what that is, so you might want to write those down with the definitions. So this should take you a couple of minutes, so pause the video, high reliability, low reliability, different methods, and make sure you've got your definition there as well. Okay, so the word reliability means consistency. So if something is reliable, then you would get consistent results. You would get the same or similar results every single time you did that experiment or that questionnaire or that interview. If you think about different methods with regards to reliability, so if we go back, lab experiments have really high reliability because they're very controlled, they have a systematic method, so you don't have extraneous variables affecting it every single time you do an experiment. Every time you do an experiment, the way you do it is exactly the same, and these things mean that you're more likely to get consistent results or similar results every time you carry it out because there's an awful lot of control there. It's a very scientific methodology. Whereas on the other hand, a natural experiment has really low reliability because there's no control over extraneous variables. We don't even control the independent variable in this situation, and there's lots of factors that could mean that it goes wrong each time you do the experiment, or something changes every time you do the experiment and you get different results. So a natural experiment would have low reliability, a lab experiment would have high reliability because it's more control, more scientific. If we think about reliability and validity, then anything that has high reliability is likely to have low validity because validity is truthfulness. So if something has a lot of control, it's very reliable, but on the other hand, it means it's not very true to life because in real life, there is not much control, okay? Real life is not like a lab experiment. There's lots and lots of extraneous variables that can change things all of the time, okay? So anything with high reliability tends to have low validity. High reliability means high control, very systematic, very objective, like a lab study. Low reliability, lack of control, not very systematic, lots of extraneous variables that could affect the results. So a natural study would go there. Questionnaires and interviews would kind of be somewhere in the middle. If you're using closed questions, that's higher reliability than open questions because you're more likely to get the same or similar results each time you do the experiment, and give the questionnaire afterwards because the questions are very clear and you have a certain set of options. The same with like a structured interview, that would have higher reliability than an unstructured interview because a structured interview you have exactly the same questions asked to the participants every single time you do it, whereas an unstructured interview, the questions can vary for each participant, which means your results are more likely to be inconsistent. Okay, so what we're going to look at in this lesson is reliability and different methods. So we're going to look at observations, self-reports and experiments. We'll look at how we can test the reliability in each of these methods, and what we can do to improve the reliability if we find out that they are not very reliable. So first of all, we'll look at observations. If you want to pause the video, you can do that now, you can make some notes, but I'll talk through it as well. So if we want to see if an observation is reliable, what we'll do is we'll get two different people to observe the same thing. So like we did in class, we did the Jeremy Kyle observation. So we have two people observing the same thing, they have the same categories, and they record their results. Then what we do is we take their results and we compare them with each other. So I've got a little thing here. So for example, we've got, these are our categories: punching, shouting, kicking. For example, if we're looking at children on the playground. Observer 1, they're their results. So you can see Observer 1 got 3, 6 and 4, and then Observer 2 got 3, 5 and 5. Okay? And then what we do is we compare their results, but we compare them in terms of a correlation. So what we can do is we can record the results like that. So Observer 1, Observer 2, and we can put them on a graph, scatter graph, to see if there's a correlation. If the correlation coefficient is 0.8 or above, so if it's a really strong correlation, then it means that the observation is reliable, because they're both observing the same thing and they're recording the categories in the same way. So it means that there's consistency there with the observation, so each observer gets the same or similar results. Okay, if however we find that the correlation is less than 0.8, so when we did our Jeremy Kyle observation in class, we were all watching the same thing, we all had the same categories, however a lot of us got very different results and our correlation would have been very poor. If that's the case, then what we can do is we can do lots of practice observations. So if we're observing anger at school and we're looking at children on the playground, what we could do is we could record some behaviours and then practice doing our observations. So each observer can practice doing their observations with the videos, and then when they go to the real situation like the playground, then when they're recording when they're observing and recording those behaviours, they're more likely to be consistent because they've had lots of practice. Also, what we could do is we could operationalise the variables. So for example, one of my variables was shouting. What does that mean? So one of my behavioural categories was shouting. Does that mean I record it every single time that person raises their voice, even if it's the same sort of sentence? Or do I record each sentence as one period of shouting? But that's something that you would discuss between observers, and you would decide, and you would make sure you're very, very clear on how to record each of those behaviours. So what you need to remember for observations: to test the reliability of observations, you use two observers, they do the same observation, they use the same behavioural categories, then we correlate their results. If there's a correlation of 0.8 or above, then our observation is reliable. If it isn't reliable, we can operationalise our behavioural categories, or we can practice the observation before we carry it out. Next, we have self-reports. So a self-report is an interview or a questionnaire. So to assess the reliability of questionnaires, we can use something called a test-retest method. So, sorry, you can pause the video now if you want and make notes, but again, I'll talk through this. So, assessing the reliability of questionnaires, we can use a test-retest method. So this is where we give the same participant the same test, but on different days or at different times. So I give Sally the test on a Monday, Sally the test on a Friday, the questionnaire on a Monday, and the questionnaire on a Friday, and then I'd correlate her results. If her results are very similar, so if she gets a high score on Monday and a high score on Friday for, I don't know, say the question's about mood, then I can correlate those. If there's a correlation again of like 0.8 or above, then my test is a reliable measure of testing Sally's mood. Okay. If however she did the test on a Monday and she was very happy, she did the test on a Friday, got a completely different result which said she was very sad, then that's not a very good measure of her mood. I need to do something else instead. or I need to change my questionnaire. And I'll discuss that in a minute. So, test, retest. Same test, same person, different times. Retest them. If the results are the same or similar, it's reliable. For an interview, it's a little bit different. So, interview, we can use inter-interviewer reliability, which is pretty similar to inter-observer reliability. What we do is we get the same person, but they're interviewed by 2 different interviewers. Each interviewer uses the same interview technique, so the same questions, the same methodology, and we see if, say, Sally is interviewed by Bob and then she's interviewed by Dave. If Sally gives the same answers to Bob and Dave, then our interview is reliable. If, however, she gives different answers to Bob than she does to Dave, then that means that our interview isn't very reliable. If our interview isn't reliable, and if our questionnaire isn't reliable, then what we can do is we can change the questions that we use, and we can make them more clear. We can make them easier for the participant to understand, and to understand how to answer them. So it could mean that maybe we've used a double negative somewhere, so we need to get rid of that. Maybe we've used a word that Sally doesn't quite understand, so each time she reads it in a different way. Okay? So that's self-report. So what you need to remember for self-reports is to test the reliability of a questionnaire, you can use the test-retest method. This is where we use the same test with the same person but at different times. If we want to test the reliability of an interview, we re-interview that person with different interviewers, and this is inter-interviewer reliability. If they give the same answers to different people, then that means that our interview is reliable. If questionnaires or interviews are not reliable, we can make the questions more clear. Okay, so change the wording of the questions, change the type of question that we use maybe. So if we're using an open question and it's quite unclear, maybe we could give them a little bit more guidance or use a closed question instead. Okay, so our final method that we're looking at with regards to reliability is experiments. When I say the word experiments, I just mean anything in general, so like anything that's in a controlled situation. So it doesn't have to be a straightforward lab experiment. It could be a controlled observation like Pandora, or it could be a structured interview. So just in general, if we've looked at our questionnaire that we use and we've used test retest, if we've looked at our observation and we've used inter-observer reliability, or interview and used inter-interviewer reliability, but we're still getting some issues, what we could do is we could delve into this in a little bit more detail, and we could maybe have a look at our experiment and test and check the reliability of the experiment that we're using and make sure that it is as standardised as possible. So again, if you want to stop the video now, you can, and make some notes, but I'll talk through this. So if our dependent variable is measured using a rating scale or behavioural categories, so that's maybe if we're using a controlled observation or we're using a questionnaire, then we could have problems with our reliability. So we've already checked for test retest, and we can use that again, or we've checked for inter-observer reliability, but we're still finding that we have issues with these. Then what we can do to improve the reliability of experiments in general is make sure that we have clear operationalised categories or operationalised dependent and independent variables, so we know exactly what we're changing, we know exactly how we're measuring it, and then what we also need to do is make sure that our experiment is standardised. Okay, so the procedures that we use are written out step by step, the equipment that we use, it's all given to the people that are carrying it out, so every single time that experiment is carried out, it's carried out in exactly the same way, and this can mean that it's more likely to be reliable because we've got consistency there with the way that we're carrying it out. So for experiments, we need to remember, for our experiments to be reliable, we must have a standardised method, we must control our extraneous variables, and depending on the experimental method that we're using, we can use test retest, inter-interviewer or inter-observer reliability, just to double check those. Okay, finally, this is a new thing that you might have come across before, but when we're talking about reliability, we have external reliability. So that's the method that we're using in general. Is that reliable? Is that consistent? And then we have internal reliability. So for internal reliability, this is the method that we're using, so the test that we're using to, I don't know, look at aggression, or the test that we're using to assess someone's memory, if we're looking at memory and sleep. That test itself has to be reliable, okay? So it's no good giving someone a test for memory that isn't reliable, even if you've got a standardised procedure, okay? So this is internal reliability. Again, stop now, make some notes, but I'll talk through it as well. So internal reliability is the reliability of the test that we are using, and we can look at the reliability of this using the split half method. So we've got a memory test to test someone's memory with regards to how much sleep they've had. What we need to do is we need to give them that test and split that test in half. So we give them one half of the test, and then we give them the second half of the test. And we would expect to find that that person would get very similar results on both halves of the test. This would mean that the test and the way that we're testing that person is consistent. So we don't start with lots of easy questions in the first half and then lots of hard questions in the second half. Those easy and hard questions need to be interspersed throughout the whole paper. So like if you think about your psychology exam, that has very high internal reliability, because if we split it in half, we'll see that each section has easy questions followed by hard questions, and this is balanced out across both halves of the paper. So it's, you don't sort of like flag and find the second half of the paper even more difficult, because that's where all the hard questions are, and that's towards the end of the test. It's actually interspersed throughout the whole paper. So if we use the split half on your psychology exam, say you're a D grade student, we'd expect that you would get the same score on the first half of the test to the second half of the test, and you would be getting the easy questions right, so the multiple choice and the short mark answers, but your essay questions you'd be getting maybe 6 every single time on each essay question. Whereas if you're a higher grade student, say like an A grade student, we'd expect you to be getting similar scores throughout each section. So like memory, you might get like 20, and then social you'd get like 19, etc. throughout the whole of the paper, okay? So that's the split half method, and that tests internal reliability. If you're unsure what internal and external reliability are, internal reliability is the test that we're using. Is that test that we're using reliable? External reliability is the method, so it's the method that we're using. You might use this test as part of your method. Is the method that we're using reliable? And you can see, like, is the questionnaire I'm using reliable? Is the interview, is the observation reliable? But like as part of your observation, you might also have a little test in there, okay? So these are the key words that you need to remember from this session on reliability: test retest, inter-observer or inter-interviewer, standardisation, control, and the split half method. So you might want to write those down as like a bit of a glossary and write definitions for each of those, okay? So to finish, what I want you to do is I want you to go back to Classroom and finish the quiz. If you have any questions about the lesson, if you're unsure about what any of the words mean that I've discussed, please just put it in the comment section under the assignment, or send me a private comment or an email, and I'll get back to you. I can direct you to different sites, or I can define those to you in a different way and explain it to you in a little bit more detail. Thank you.